I left work earlier than usual that day, heart racing with excitement as I merged on the highway, rehearsing the words I'd say when I saw her. 9 years of marriage wasn't a small milestone, and I'd gone out of my way to make this one feel special. I had a bouquet of white roses riding shotgun, wrapped in soft paper that crinkled each time I made a turn. Melissa loved white roses, so they reminded her of our wedding day. I made a reservation at La Verona, the same little Italian place where we'd celebrated our first anniversary, back when money was tighter, but everything still felt light. The hostess even remembered us when I called. It felt like everything was aligning for the perfect surprise. I pulled into the lot of Axiom Dynamics around 3:15. It was strange seeing the place in daylight hours. Usually I'd only been here late in the evening to pick Melissa up after work functions or the occasional emergency overtime. The glass building shimmered against the overcast sky, a modern cube with tinted windows that kept its secrets. I walked in, roses in hand, expecting to be greeted by the familiar rhythm of a quiet corporate lobby, the subtle smell of cleaning polish and warm coffee lingering in the air. Instead, I was met with something unexpected. Harold, the security guard I'd seen more times than I could count, sat behind a reception desk with his reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up and offered a brief, distracted smile. I smiled back and said I was here to surprise my wife, Melissa Whitaker. I told him I had something planned for our anniversary, trying to keep my voice down to preserve the surprise. But the moment I said her name, Harold's expression shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. He straightened up slowly, blinking at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Melissa Whitaker? He asked, his brow furrowed. Then he hesitated. You're her husband? It took me a second to answer. I let out a short laugh, thinking maybe he was just having an off day. Yeah, I said, Jonathan. We've been married 9 years today. I held up the roses a little, an awkward gesture I immediately regretted. His confusion didn't fade. He looked almost concerned. He glanced at his computer screen, then back at me. That's odd, he said quietly. I thought. He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, he pushed back from his desk, clearly uncomfortable, and excused himself to make a quick call. Said something about checking if Melissa was in a meeting. I waited, pacing a little, trying to shrug off the weird tension that had taken hold of the room. Maybe she'd changed her schedule. Maybe she'd mentioned something to Harold that I hadn't heard about. But still, something about his hesitation stuck with me. When he returned, Harold's voice was tight, almost apologetic. She's not available right now, he said, avoiding my eyes. Then, after a beat, he added, maybe it's better if you text her. There was no reason for that to feel as unsettling as it did, but it lodged itself deep in my chest like a splinter. I thanked him, stepped out of the building, and stood on the sidewalk, staring down at my phone. I didn't text. I called. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Melissa never ignored my calls. Not like this. The sky above was starting to darken, the clouds thick with pending rain, and for the first time all day, the white roses in my hand felt wrong. I stood there for another moment, pulse picking up, thoughts racing faster than I could catch them, before turning back toward the car, that uneasy feeling in my gut growing heavier with every step. I was halfway to my car, trying to steady my breath and convince myself I was overthinking things, when Harold's voice called after me, hesitant, almost fragile in tone. I turned, and he stood just outside the lobby doors, his hand raised slightly, like he wasn't sure he should say what he was about to say. There he is right now, he muttered, not quite meeting my eyes, then nodded toward a tall man walking confidently across the plaza. His stride was relaxed but assured, the kind of walk that belonged to someone used to boardrooms and closing deals. His suit was tailored perfectly, subtle pinstripes catching the afternoon light, and his shoes hit the pavement with the kind of crisp precision that spoke of money and presence. That's Alan Pierce, Harold added, a little too quietly, like he was trying to protect me from something, but wasn't sure how. Then, almost like the words had betrayed him the moment they left his mouth, he finished, Melissa's husband. I blinked, not processing at first. I turned fully to look at him. Sorry, what? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He glanced away, guilt clear in every line of his face. I said, Melissa's husband. He pointed again, just as Alan stepped onto the curb, adjusting the sleeve of his blazer, casually checking his watch, then slipping a phone from his pocket. I just stared. I don't remember walking back across the parking lot. I must have, but all I recall is the dull roar of blood in my ears and the sound of my heart pounding behind my ribs. Alan noticed me just as I got close, probably wondering why a stranger was approaching him so directly. He offered a polite, practiced smile, the kind executives give to everyone by default. And then something shifted in his eyes as he noticed the roses in my hand, and maybe something in my face that betrayed what I was feeling. "Can I help you?" he asked, cool but not unfriendly. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I was doing, only that I needed answers. I stared at him for a beat too long, then finally said, "I'm looking for Melissa Whitaker." His brows lifted slightly. "My wife," I added, the words falling out like bricks. He gave a short laugh, more confused than amused. "That's funny," he said. "I'm Melissa's husband." The silence that followed was absolute. No ambient office chatter, no cars in the distance, no wind in the trees. Just two men, standing face to face, with the same name on their lips and the same woman in their lives. I must have gone pale. I felt cold all at once, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a second. I looked at him, taking in every detail, his wedding band, the faint tan line on his finger suggesting it had been there a while, the calm, assured posture of a man who wasn't bluffing. He wasn't playing some game. He believed it, every word. And I knew, instantly, he wasn't lying. I reached into my wallet with a hand that barely felt like my own and pulled out a photo. It was one we took on our last vacation, just the two of us on the beach in Charleston, the sun setting behind us. Melissa was laughing, my arm around her, the breeze lifting her hair. I held it up. "This is my wife," I said. "We've been married 9 years." He stared at the photo. His face shifted, his eyes sharpening, then narrowing just slightly. That's Melissa," he said, but the certainty in his voice cracked at the edges. Then he took out his phone and swiped to a picture of the two of them, dressed formally at a gala. Her hand rested gently on his chest. She was wearing a navy dress I'd never seen before. 3 years, he said, more to himself than to me. "We've been married 3 years. And just like that, everything I thought I knew started to unravel. The sound of the elevator chime echoed through the lobby like a warning bell, sharp and sudden, slicing through the thick silence that had settled between us. Both Alan and I turned instinctively, our bodies still tense, our minds already spiraling in directions we hadn't even begun to understand. And then, just like that, the door slid open, and Melissa stepped out. She looked exactly like she always did when she was at work, poised, confident, polished. Her black blazer fit perfectly over a crisp white blouse, heels clicking softly as she took a single step forward, a tablet tucked under one arm, her badge clipped neatly at her waist. Her expression was composed, professional, distracted at first, like she was expecting nothing more than a normal Thursday afternoon. Then she saw us. Her body froze mid-step. The slight smile she'd been wearing dropped instantly, as if the muscles in her face no longer knew how to function. Her eyes moved between us, first to Alan, then to me, then back again, and the color drained from her skin so fast it was like watching a photograph being bleached in real time. She didn't speak right away. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but her voice caught somewhere in her throat. Her hand tightened around the tablet until her knuckles turned white. For a long moment, none of us moved. Alan stepped forward first. His voice was calm, but it had an edge to it I'd never heard before, a sharpness barely contained beneath the surface. "Melissa," he said, "this man says he's your husband. Your legal husband." He turned slightly toward me without taking his eyes off her. "Is that true?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Her chin trembled once. And then, finally, her voice came out, quiet, fragile, but unmistakably honest. "Yes, Jonathan is my husband. My legal husband." It hit like a blow to the chest. I didn't even realize I'd been holding on to hope. Hope that this was all some massive misunderstanding, that Alan was mistaken or delusional or confused. But hearing her say it, hearing her confirm it with her own voice, stripped everything down to the bone. Alan's expression didn't change much, but his posture did. His shoulders pulled back, his jaw set tighter, and he took one slow, deliberate step toward her. "Then what the hell have we been doing for the last 3 years?" Melissa blinked fast, tears already forming at the corners of her eyes, and shook her head. "Alan, it wasn't supposed to go this far. It started differently. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." He cut her off. "Were we ever actually married?" She hesitated. "No, not legally. The documents were staged. The ceremony was real, but the license, it wasn't filed. I forged the paperwork." Her voice cracked on that last sentence, and she looked down, unable to hold either of our gazes anymore. Alan exhaled sharply, like he'd been punched. I stared at her, barely breathing, my mind trying to catch up with what I was hearing. "Forged, staged, lied to, manipulated. You pretended to marry him," I said, my voice low and flat, "while still married to me. You told me you had business trips, late meetings, friends' weekends. The whole time you were living another life with him?" Melissa looked up at me, eyes glassy with panic, pain, something between guilt and desperation. I never wanted to hurt you, Jonathan. I didn't know how to stop. I thought I could manage it, I thought. You thought you could manage having two husbands? Alan snapped, his voice louder now, echoing across the marble lobby. She flinched, then tried again, hands out in a weak, pleading gesture. I didn't mean to fall in love with you, she said to Alan, voice trembling. It started with work. You were kind, and things were hard with Jonathan at the time. And I don't know. One thing led to another, and I didn't have the strength to end it. You didn't have the strength to end it, I repeated, my voice suddenly cold, so instead, you just added a second life. Melissa stepped forward, one hand reaching slightly toward me, but I took a step back. Her eyes moved between us again, panicked now, as if searching for a way to fix what had already collapsed completely. I never meant for it to be cruel, she whispered. I loved you both in different ways. I thought if I could just keep everything balanced. Balanced? Alan said, his voice breaking. You built your life on a lie. On lies. Every dinner, every holiday, every time you looked me in the eye. You knew. She nodded, finally, slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. I knew. And that was it. Nothing else, she said, after that mattered. After that moment in the lobby, after her confession dropped like a brick and shattered everything I thought I understood about my life, I couldn't just walk away. I should have. Every cell in my body screamed for me to turn around and never look back. But something deeper, some wounded, furious part of me, needed to know the full extent of it. The truth wasn't enough anymore. I needed the details, the architecture of the betrayal. And as I pulled at each thread, what I uncovered was a structure so complex, so meticulously crafted, that it didn't even seem real. She had built a second life, not in secret corners or fleeting moments, but fully, with scaffolding and foundations. Melissa didn't just lie. She engineered an existence. I found the bank transfers first, small amounts at first, disguised as expenses for her freelance marketing work. Years ago, she had come to me with a plan, pitching the idea of starting her own brand strategy firm. She had a name picked out, a website mocked up, even a potential client list. She'd been methodical, compelling, believable. She said she didn't need much to get started, just a small investment. I trusted her without question. We were married. What was mine was hers. That's what I thought. Over the years, I gave her tens of thousands, always under the assumption it was helping her grow something of her own, something she could be proud of. But when I began tracing those payments, cross-referencing accounts, it became horrifyingly clear that the money hadn't gone into a business at all. It had gone toward a down payment on a home, Alan's home. A sleek, modern property in McLean, with high ceilings and cold stone counters. I recognized the backsplash from one of her Instagram stories, though she'd claimed she'd been visiting a friend. The granite wasn't even subtle. It was the same pattern, the same lighting. She told Alan the house had been a gift from her late aunt, that the money came through an inheritance, delayed by probate. She even had documents to support the claim, falsified letters from lawyers, paperwork that, at first glance, looked legitimate. And Alan, like me, believed her. Because who prepares themselves to distrust the person they kiss goodnight every day? It got worse. She told him she had a sick aunt in Oregon who needed full-time support. Said she'd fly out every other week to care for her, take her doctor's appointments, handle her estate. In reality, those were the weeks she came home to me. She told me she was working extended hours at Axiom Dynamics, putting in overtime for a big account that was supposedly going international. She even had fake names saved in her phone, messages she'd send herself under fake client identities to throw me off. Sometimes she'd get back late, her hair windblown, eyes tired. I brought her tea. She thanked me, and I never suspected a thing. She bought 2 calendars. One lived in her work bag, the other in a drawer in our shared home office. Each was filled with events, appointments, and reminders tailored to the life she was living that day. Birthdays, anniversaries, invented deadlines. She had scheduled her entire existence like a consultant managing 2 impossible clients, and somehow it had worked for years. When I looked into the wedding photos Alan had posted from Hawaii, a cold knot formed in my stomach. The resort looked familiar, not because I'd been there, but because I had paid for it, down to the detail. The flowers, the catering, the ring. I recognized the transaction logs from our shared account, months prior, when she told me she was purchasing inventory for a trade show. It was all there, hidden behind fake invoices and deliberately vague descriptions. She had used the money I worked for, the hours I poured into client reports, late nights drafting pitch decks, and endless travel, to fund her second wedding. A wedding to a man she wasn't even legally married to. Emotionally, she had split herself clean down the middle. With Alan, She was poised, elegant, corporate, someone's dream wife at charity galas and business dinners. With me, she was softer, relaxed, curled beside me on the couch watching documentaries and cooking Sunday breakfast in my shirt. Two versions of the same woman, living on alternate timelines. But it was the financial betrayal that finally broke me. She hadn't just cheated. She had robbed me blind and done it with surgical precision. Everything I gave her out of love, my trust, my earnings, my time, had been redirected, repackaged, and used to build someone else's dream. She lived between our two homes like a ghost, slipping in and out of bedrooms, kitchens, lives, never letting either of us see the full picture. And we never did. Not until now. Sitting across from Alan in the dim light of a corner booth at a quiet restaurant. It felt surreal how quickly we had gone from strangers to allies. Less than 24 hours ago, I hadn't known he existed. Now we were comparing bank statements, photos, and dates, trying to piece together a puzzle that neither of us realized we'd been trapped inside for years. There was a grim clarity in our shared silence, a mutual understanding that we were both the victims of something more elaborate, more deliberate, than either of us had ever imagined possible. We started with dates. I opened my calendar app and began scrolling back, naming trips Melissa had taken, client retreats, marketing conferences, overnight events. Alan, with his own digital records, began reading off his corresponding entries. Weekends where she was supposedly in Oregon caring for her sick aunt, or on business travel with Axion's West Coast team. And the overlap was immediate. Every week she claimed she was out of town for me. She was with him, and every time she told him she was on the other side of the country, she was back home with me. She had constructed her story with almost clinical precision, always leaving just enough wiggle room for plausible deniability, but never enough to draw suspicion. Until now, the financial side was even uglier. I printed out a series of statements showing every transfer I had ever made to her business account. It had a clean name, Morrison Creative Events, and even a logo. I remember being impressed when she first pitched it to me. She had graphs, a branding deck, a website, even a mock-up for her team page that included fake names and stock images of young professionals. I never once doubted it. And over the years, I had transferred money on a regular basis. Reinvestment, she called it. First $5,000 here and there, then larger sums for event materials, equipment upgrades, venue retainers. When we added it all up, the total was staggering, over $200,000. Every penny was framed as a business investment. Every cent had vanished. Alan's jaw tightened when he pulled up his own records. Her name wasn't on his accounts, but she had access through a shared credit card. She told him she didn't want the hassle of financial entanglement, which he now realized was her way of staying invisible while draining resources. His expenses lined up eerily with mine. Luxury travel, designer clothing, wellness retreats, all camouflaged under the umbrella of personal growth and entrepreneurship. Between the two of us, she had lived a six-figure lifestyle, and neither of us had known. We weren't done. Alan reached out to a friend of his, someone in private security, who had access to building surveillance archives. It was a long shot, but somehow we got it. 2 months of lobby camera footage, compressed and silent, but undeniable. There she was, arriving late on Wednesday nights, sometimes with an overnight bag, sometimes in heels and a different outfit than what she'd worn leaving our house. Different entrances, different exits. In one clip, she kissed Alan in the parking garage elevator. In another, she left my car at the corner, fixing her hair before stepping inside. There was no more speculation. The evidence had weight. The kind of weight that made your stomach twist because there was no longer room for doubt. We had timelines, receipts, images. It was all real. And then came the detail that hit me the hardest. We had talked about having children once, a few years ago. I remember that conversation vividly. Sitting on the back porch after dinner, the air warm, the stars clear. Melissa had reached for my hand and told me she wasn't ready. Said there were complications, that her doctor was concerned, that we needed to wait. I understood. I loved her. I never pressed. I let it go. Alan stared at his coffee for a long time before saying she told him the opposite. That she was excited about the idea of kids, that she just wanted to wait until her business was more stable. But she never mentioned complications. She said she was healthy and looking forward to building a family someday. And yet, she never got pregnant. Not once. Not with me. Not with him. I didn't want to believe it, but Alan was the one who uncovered it. A transaction in one of her older medical records revealed a procedure, an elective sterilization. It had happened 4 years ago. No complications. No medical necessity. Just a decision she made, alone, while telling both of us different lies. She had quietly removed, the possibility of children from both of our futures, while feeding us entirely separate narratives. I felt physically ill when I read the confirmation. It wasn't the procedure itself. It was the sheer weight of the manipulation behind it. She had known. She had planned. And she had lied, again and again. While watching both of us build our lives around illusions she carefully fed and maintained. We had uncovered the wreckage of 2 lives she'd stitched together with stolen time and stolen money. And in that booth, with papers and devices spread between us like the debris field of a plane crash, Alan and I sat in silence. 2 men who'd loved the same woman, now sifting through the ashes of everything she'd burned. The day of her arrest was quiet and unceremonious, nothing like the dramatic moment I had envisioned in the early days of discovering everything. There were no handcuffs in front of flashing cameras, no agents kicking down doors. Instead, she was picked up from her apartment by 2 plainclothes detectives, her wrists cuffed behind her back as she was guided into the back seat of an unmarked car. I wasn't there to see it, but Alan was. He sent me a photo, blurry, taken from a distance, but unmistakable Melissa, the woman who once walked boardrooms with the posture of someone who owned them, now looking like a shell, her hair pulled back hastily, her shoulders hunched like the weight of her own deceit was finally crushing her. She was charged formally within 24 hours. Bigamy, wire fraud, identity misrepresentation, and multiple counts of financial deception. The prosecutors moved fast. The evidence was overwhelming. Paper trails, surveillance, forged documents, false business filings. And they had 2 victims standing in perfect synchronization, ready to testify. I didn't attend the early hearings. I couldn't stomach seeing her just yet. But I watched the footage later, over and over again, trying to make sense of her posture, her expressions. There was no fight in her anymore. No rebuttals, no denials, no sharp rebuttals like the ones she had so easily delivered in arguments past. Her once sharp wardrobe had been replaced with neutral slacks and a loose blouse that hung awkwardly on her frame. Even her voice, when she spoke to the judge, sounded muted, as if she'd finally been caught in a storm of her own making and had stopped swimming. By the time the trial reached its final phase, I had managed to pull myself together enough to speak. The courtroom was sterile and cold, the kind of space that stripped emotion from anything you brought into it. But when I stood to give my victim impact statement, my hands didn't shake. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I married. I saw the person who took everything that meant something to me and repurposed it into a weapon. I told the court about the trust one lost, not just in her, but in myself. How I second-guessed every decision, every instinct, every memory of love that now felt contaminated. I spoke of the nights I couldn't sleep, not because I missed her, but because I kept replaying the years I gave away to someone who never truly existed. I told them that the deepest wound wasn't even the money. It was the fact that I didn't know what parts of my own life were real anymore. Then Alan spoke. His voice cracked only once, but when it did, it echoed. He talked about the future he'd built in his head, the plans he'd made, the family he wanted. He talked about how Melissa had made him feel chosen, seen, safe, and how every single moment of that had been orchestrated for a con. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just painted the portrait of a dream that had been stolen before it ever had the chance to breathe. The judge was measured but firm in sentencing. Melissa was given 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. The final number was just under $300,000, money she almost certainly no longer had. The illusion of her business collapsed as soon as the charges were made public. Clients vanished. Partners ghosted her. Her license to operate was revoked. Her accounts were frozen. There was no press outside the courthouse that day. Just a gray van waiting to transport her to county. As she walked past us, escorted by 2 officers, she didn't look at me. She didn't look at Alan either. She stared straight ahead like someone who had finally run out of lies to cling to. Her face was pale, her lips pressed in a tight line. No tears, no apologies, just silence. But even with her gone, even with the sentence handed down, there was no neat resolution. No gavel could return the years. No restitution could return the reality she fractured. And even though justice was technically served, the damage she left behind lived in every unanswered question we still carried. The first time Alan and I met up after the trial, it wasn't planned. I ran into him at a coffee shop not far from the courthouse, both of us clearly trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. We locked eyes in that awkward way people do when they're not sure whether to wave or walk away. But neither of us left. We ended up sitting together at a small table near the window, 2 men who had nothing in common except for the most intimate betrayal of their lives. There was a strange comfort in the silence between us at first, like neither of us needed to explain why we looked so tired or why every casual conversation around us sounded like it was happening in another world at first. We kept things surface level. Work updates, a passing comment about the bitter coffee, a shared glance when a couple nearby laughed too loud. But as the minutes passed, something shifted. There was no reason to pretend. He had seen the same footage I had. He had read the same bank statements, listened to the same recordings, walked the same road of disbelief, humiliation, and grief. I didn't have to find the words to describe what it felt like to lie awake at night, dissecting memories that used to feel safe. He already knew. That day turned into a routine. Not constant, not forced, but steady. Once or twice a month, we'd meet for coffee, and without planning it, we started filling in the blanks that no one else could help us fill. We weren't trying to make sense of her anymore. That part was over. What we were really doing was giving shape to the chaos, trying to reclaim pieces of ourselves that had been lost in her web. We talked about the fake anniversaries, the carefully coordinated business trips that now seemed laughable in hindsight. He told me about a weekend she had planned at a vineyard in Napa, complete with spa treatments, a private chef, and a handwritten letter she gave him at dinner, thanking him for being her real home. That was the same weekend she told me she was traveling for a Women in Business Leadership Summit. I remembered picking her up from the airport, carrying her bag, listening to her talk about fake workshops, fake networking dinners. She had cried in the car, said she was exhausted but fulfilled. I believed every word. There was a heaviness to those conversations, but also a strange lightness. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my confusion. Alan wasn't just someone who had been wronged the same way. I realized he had lived beside me in that invisible parallel life, unknowingly sharing a partner who never truly existed. And yet, despite the bitterness, there was no resentment between us. He wasn't my competition. He had been conned, just like I had, and somehow, that shared ruin built something almost like trust. When legal proceedings picked up, civil filings, restitution logistics, the slow grind of bureaucracy, we helped each other navigate the maze. He forwarded me documents. I walked him through some of the banking terminology buried in the reports. When he had to testify about a specific transaction, I sent him the screenshots he'd need. When I struggled to put together a timeline for the insurance claim, he filled in the gaps. There were days when I wasn't sure if I was still operating on anger or just inertia, but having him on the other side of the emails made it feel less like I was rebuilding alone. People didn't understand it. Friends asked why I stayed in touch with him, why I chose to keep revisiting the wreckage instead of moving on. But they didn't get it. Alan was the only person in the world who could look at me and understand exactly what it meant to grieve someone who was still alive, to mourn a relationship that had been carefully crafted on lies so intimate, so calculated, they bordered on surgical. There's a kind of brotherhood that's born in the fire. Not the kind you seek, but the kind that forms when you walk through something so devastating, so specific, that no one else can really stand beside you in it. We didn't become best friends. We didn't start seeing each other's families or talking every day, but we became something else. A strange kind of mirror, a reminder that the damage wasn't our fault, that we weren't stupid or blind, just targeted. Sometimes we talk about forgiveness, not for her, but for ourselves, for not noticing, for letting it go on so long, for still dreaming, even now, about the life we thought we had. And in those moments, between sips of coffee and the clatter of cups around us, we'd sit quietly, knowing there were no clean answers. But at least we weren't alone in the aftermath. 6 months after everything unraveled, I stood in the driveway of the house I had once called home, watching strangers walk through it like it was just another listing. The kitchen where I used to cook her breakfast was now a selling point with updated countertops. The bedroom where we had once laughed under soft morning light was just another square foot of space, repainted in a neutral tone to help buyers imagine themselves here. It was surreal to watch something so personal become transactional, but I knew I had to let it go. Keeping that house felt like preserving a monument to a life that never truly existed. I signed the paperwork with a hand that felt steadier than I expected, then turned in the keys and walked away without looking back. I moved into a small apartment downtown, the kind of place that felt temporary on purpose. It was clean, quiet, and anonymous, just what I needed. I brought only the essentials, stripped my belongings down to what I could carry in a few carloads. No framed photos, no shared furniture, no artifacts from the life Melissa and I had built. That version of my life had collapsed under its own weight, and I wasn't interested in dragging its debris into this new space. I slept on a mattress on the floor for the first few weeks, not out of necessity, but because it felt right to start over that way, unencumbered, raw, honest. Alan was adjusting differently. He had already started dating again. He told me once over coffee that he didn't want Melissa to have the power to ruin every future connection he might have. I admired that, even envied it a little. But I wasn't there. I wasn't even close. Every time I thought about opening myself up to someone new, I felt this wall go up. Automatic, defensive, complete. It wasn't bitterness. It was exhaustion. I had given so much of myself to someone who had never been real that I no longer trusted my ability to know what was genuine. I wasn't afraid of love. I was afraid of illusion. Despite the trial being over, the unraveling hadn't stopped. We were still discovering pieces of her deception tucked into forgotten folders, neglected accounts, old emails. She had left fingerprints everywhere, cryptic PayPal transactions labeled client refund, unexplained Amazon deliveries to P.O. boxes, and even a small savings account under the name Marie S., which turned out to be an alias she had used years earlier. Alan and I compared findings like detectives working a cold case, each discovery peeling back another layer of the woman we thought we knew. Then came the moment I hadn't expected, a chance encounter with Melissa's mother. It happened in the aisle of a grocery store of all places. I recognized her instantly, though it had been years since we last spoke. She looked older, thinner, her eyes tired but alert. I almost turned and walked the other way, but she saw me first. There was a pause between us, heavy and quiet, before she walked over and placed a hand gently on my arm. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I swear to you, Jonathan, I didn't know what she was doing." I nodded, not because I forgave her, but because I believed her. She looked down for a moment, then met my eyes again. "I always felt like something wasn't right," she whispered, like she was never fully present, like she was playing a part she didn't even believe in. She paused. I just never imagined it was this that stayed with me for days. Melissa had been a mirror for all of us, reflecting back what we wanted, what we needed. With me, she was grounded and loving, ambitious but soft. With Alan, she was elegant, driven, socially flawless. With her mother, she must have played the role of the dutiful daughter, the self-made woman with perfect balance. And behind all of those roles, there was nothing solid, just reflections. Smoke. A talent for becoming whatever the moment demanded. I don't think I'll ever fully understand her, and maybe that's what haunts me the most. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that I spent nearly a decade next to someone who was never fully there. Someone who constructed love like a performance, designed affection like strategy. I survived it, but I came out of it stripped bare, changed in ways no amount of time will ever fully reverse. But I'm still here. The silence in my apartment no longer feels heavy. The space I occupy now is mine, completely, even if it's small. And in that space, there's finally room for something I couldn't grasp before: peace, not the kind you declare out loud, but the kind you feel in your bones when the storm finally moves on.